My mother texted me 2 nights before my sister Camille's engagement dinner and said Hargrove had reached its final head count. There was no seat for me. 20 minutes later, Luis, the general manager at my restaurant, called about an after-party for 36 people. According to the event request, Juniper House would provide the private room, a late-tasting menu, desserts, and wine after the dinner at Hargrove. The request also said the owner was hosting the event, so the family would not need to pay a deposit. I owned Juniper House. I asked Luis, who had submitted it. He sent me the email while we were still on the phone. Mom had used an old guest planning account I had set up for my parents' 40th anniversary. Back then, the account let her update meal choices and add a few relatives without calling during dinner service. It was never meant to book another private event. She told our events assistant that I had already agreed and was too busy to deal with the details. The message included one of our seasonal menus and a request to keep the event off the public calendar because it was a family gift. In the email, she called Juniper House the Mercer family restaurant. The Hargrove dinner had 30 guests. Mom's after-party list had 36. I told Luis to save the email and leave the request unconfirmed. Then I asked him to send Mom our normal quote for a group that size. It covered the room, food, kitchen staff, servers, tax, gratuity, and the deposit we required before holding a date. After we hung up, I replied to Mom's text. I told her I understood that I was not invited to Hargrove. Juniper had not accepted an after-party, and we would not prepare one without a signed agreement and payment. She called before I had time to put my phone in my pocket. Mom said the after-party was supposed to be my contribution. Dad was paying for dinner. She had handled the invitations. Camille had been planning for weeks. Mom kept describing the request as if she wanted me to bring a tray of cookies instead of opening a second private event after 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. I told her we would need extra cooks, servers, and bartenders. The private room could not be promised without checking the reservation calendar. Food that had not been ordered did not exist just because she wanted it that night. She said I was making family sound like a customer. I asked why nobody had invited me if they still expected me to host everyone afterward. Mom said Camille was already nervous about the dinner. Ethan's parents knew a lot of people in local business circles, and Camille wanted everything to go smoothly. Then, Mom said I had a habit of turning any dinner into a discussion about restaurants. I asked whether that was why I had been left out. She hesitated before saying Camille wanted one night where she did not feel compared to me. I told her the event quote was on its way. "You're charging your sister?" she asked. "No, I'm telling you there is no booking." Mom reminded me that I had helped with family parties before. She said I usually complained and then worked something out. I had covered food, stayed late, and fixed last-minute plans because arguing took longer than doing the work. After the call, I opened the event file and changed the request from pending to declined. Camille was 3 years older than me. Our parents rarely described her as needing help, but their plans usually changed when she wanted something. She studied finance, joined a regional bank, and moved into a condo near downtown before she turned 30. Mom helped choose the furniture. Dad replaced the living room floor and refused to let Camille pay him. My promotion to sous chef got a shorter reaction. Mom asked whether the new title came with weekends off. I said no, and she looked disappointed. Dinner waited when Camille ran late. After my shifts, I usually found a covered plate in the refrigerator and a pan soaking in the sink. Dad always said I was better at taking care of myself. He used that explanation whenever I pointed out that the family had waited an hour for Camille but started dessert without me. The same thing happened when Camille graduated from her bank's management program. Mom booked a brunch and asked me to bring pastries for 20 people. I arrived before the guests, set everything out, and left for work before Camille came downstairs. Later, Mom posted photographs thanking everyone who had helped. My pastries were in 3 of the pictures, but my name was not in the post. I noticed the omission, but calling Mom would have turned into a conversation about why I needed public credit for helping my sister. I left it alone, as I usually did. Juniper House was already open when I joined it. The original owner, Martin Hale, had gone through 2 chefs in 1 year and was losing money. He hired me to rebuild the menu and bring food costs down. I cut dishes that required ingredients we hardly used, renegotiated several vendor orders, and shortened prep on the busiest nights. 2 line cooks were trained on new stations, so 1 call-out would not ruin service. Within a year, the restaurant had steadier sales and fewer nights where the kitchen fell apart before 9. Martin could not afford the raise he had promised me, so he offered a small ownership share. I used my savings and borrowed against my car to buy it. Several years later, Martin retired. Luis and I took out a business loan and purchased what remained. I became the majority owner. My parents knew I had bought into Juniper. They never asked for the details. Mom still told relatives that I worked on the menu. Dad talked about Luis as if he were my employer because he wore a suit more often than I did. Camille knew exactly what I owned. The year before her engagement, she brought several co-workers to Juniper. One of them had seen my name in a local restaurant article and asked if I was the chef owner. Camille answered first. She runs the kitchen. It was not completely false, so I let it pass. Later, she asked the server to send desserts for the table and put them on my account. Her coworker congratulated me anyway. Camille smiled, then started talking about a large commercial loan she had closed that month. I should have corrected her at the table, but I did not want to argue in front of her coworkers. I approved the desserts too, and Camille kept using the same wording after that. Something similar happened after another article mentioned Juniper. Mom shared it in the family group chat. Camille responded with a picture of an award from her bank. Nobody had asked about work awards. She posted it anyway. I never called her jealous because I could not prove what she felt, and I knew how that conversation would go. Mom would say I was competing with Camille. Dad would tell me to be happy for my sister. Camille avoided the ownership question. When someone asked directly, she gave a short answer and moved the conversation somewhere else. Over time, she started saying that our family had a restaurant downtown. She said it to coworkers, to Ethan, and eventually to Ethan's parents. I found that out when Ethan's mother thanked Dad for helping me get started. Standing beside me, Dad accepted the compliment and said opening a restaurant took the whole family. Later, I corrected him in the parking lot. Dad said Diane had only been making conversation and that there was no reason to embarrass him over a few words. I went to work without pushing it further. By the time Camille got engaged, Ethan's parents believed Mom and Dad had financed Juniper and that Camille could arrange private events there. I had never given any of them permission to say that. Luis sent Mom the quote the next morning. She replied that there had been a misunderstanding and asked him to hold the private room while she worked things out with me. I told him not to hold it. Camille called around noon. She began by saying Mom had already told Ethan's family there would be a private stop after Hargrove. If we canceled now, she said, our family would look cheap and disorganized. I asked when she first heard about the plan. About 3 weeks ago? I asked why she had waited until 2 days before the dinner to contact me. She said Mom was handling it and believed I had already agreed. I asked whether Camille had ever heard me agree. She avoided the question and started explaining why Juniper was a good choice. Hargrove closed its private room at 10. Ethan's relatives wanted more time together. Several people on his father's guest list booked corporate dinners and might become customers. I asked what she had told them about the restaurant. I said our family has a restaurant. She said that statement was accurate because I was part of the family. Camille pointed out that she had never signed a contract or claimed to own my shares. She said people use the phrase family business loosely all the time. Juniper belonged to Luis and me. Mom, Dad, and Camille had never invested in it or helped run it. I asked why I could provide the restaurant but could not attend the engagement dinner. Camille said Mom had made the guest list. I told her Mom had already admitted that Camille did not want me there. Camille went quiet, then said, I knew how people reacted when they learned I owned Juniper. They asked about the menu, the business loan, the staff, and whether I planned to open another place. She said she did not want to spend her engagement dinner answering questions about me. I told her I could sit through one meal without discussing work. She brought up the time I spent 10 minutes asking a Hargrove server about allergies, then reminded me of a family dinner where I went into the kitchen to speak to the chef. Those things had happened. The allergy discussion started because Mom was insisting the restaurant could serve Aunt Mara something the server had already said was unsafe. I spoke to the chef at the other dinner because Dad complained about his steak until the server looked ready to cry. Rather than argue through every detail, I asked why Ethan's parents thought Mom and Dad had helped buy Juniper. She mentioned the first knife set Dad bought and said Mom had supported me when I was younger. Everything else, according to Camille, was a difference in wording. Then she said correcting people at the engagement dinner would have made everyone uncomfortable. I told her that leaving me out had made the correction unnecessary, then repeated the deadline for the full deposit. Camille said I was taking out my feelings about the dinner on her guests. I told her the guest did not have a reservation to lose. By that evening, Mom had begun calling relatives. Aunt Mara phoned me and asked why I had canceled Camille's gift. I told her I had never offered one. Mom had also said I was under pressure at work and was reacting badly to the guest list. I gave Mara the basic timeline and asked her not to add anything else when people called. 2 cousins texted afterward. One asked me to stop punishing Camille. The other offered to pay for his own drinks if that was what the argument was about. I sent both of them the same answer. No event had been booked. After that conversation, I removed my parents and Camille from the friends and family account at Juniper. Managers had used that account to comp small family bills when I was not there. The account had started after Mom brought 8 relatives in after church without warning. I covered 2 appetizers and told myself it was easier than discussing the bill at the table. Camille later used the same account for a coworker dinner, and Dad used it when a flooring client came in. Each charge was small enough that I approved it and moved on. By the time of the engagement, all 3 of them were used to calling Juniper and mentioning my name. I also closed Mom's old guest profile and changed the rear door code. There had been too many occasions when I refused something, then learned that one of them had called an employee and claimed I had changed my mind. Dad came to Juniper on Thursday morning with a white envelope. It held $1,000 in cash. The deposit on the quote was more than 3 times that amount. Dad placed it on my desk and said it should be enough to show that the family was serious. I gave it back. He said contracts made sense for strangers, not parents and daughters. Then he listed a few things he had paid for when I was younger, including my first knife roll and the application fee for culinary school. I told him those expenses did not reserve a private room 15 years later. Dad moved on to Ethan's father. He said the man knew developers, lawyers, and company owners who could bring Juniper plenty of business. Dad believed I was looking at the cost of one evening instead of the customers it might create. I asked whether any of those people knew that Juniper had not accepted the party. Dad shrugged and said it would not matter once they arrived. He was sure I would not send 36 dressed-up guests back outside. I asked whether he had heard me refuse the event. Dad said yes, but he still believed I would change my mind when everyone reached the door. I told Dad the restaurant would run normal service on Saturday. He said Camille deserved one night when she did not come second to my work. I reminded him that the dinner was being planned around Camille, paid for by him and attended by everyone she wanted except me. What she was asking for now was a restaurant our parents did not own. Dad accused me of keeping score. I asked him to take the envelope with him. After he left, Luis found me in the office entering a new code for the rear door. I had typed the first replacement incorrectly and locked myself out of the setup screen. He asked whether I wanted him at the host stand on Saturday. I said I could handle my family. Luis said he knew I could, but I was already covering for a cook who had the flu. He did not want the staff making decisions while I was in the kitchen and my parents were arguing at the front. He was right about the staff being caught in the middle, so we made a simple plan. Luis would stay near the host stand. The closing manager received copies of my emails. Nobody would move existing reservations, open a family tab, or offer free drinks while waiting for me. Luis checked the event record again. The file contained no deposit, signed agreement, or confirmation from my email. Our events assistant had treated it as an inquiry because it came from an old account and mentioned my name. On Friday morning, an architecture firm paid the deposit for the private room and selected its menu. The room was no longer available. I sent Mom, Dad, and Camille one final email. It said Juniper had no engagement event on the calendar. Another customer had booked the private room, and we could not take a walk-in group of 36. Mom did not reply. That afternoon, she left Luis a voicemail. She said the family might stop in for one drink after Hargrove and asked him not to bother me during service. Near the end, she said, "Rowan hates looking difficult in front of strangers. Once we're there, she'll make room." Luis forwarded the message. I saved it with the other emails and went back to work. Saturday service started at 5. By 7:30, every table was occupied. The architecture firm arrived on time and went into the private room. Their menu had been prepared that afternoon, and the employees assigned to the event were already working. I stayed on the pass because one of our cooks was sick. It also kept me from checking my phone every few minutes. A little after 8, Aunt Mara texted from Hargrove. Mom had announced that the Mercer family would host a chef's tasting downtown after dinner. Mara sent another message a few minutes later. Diane had asked Dad whether the family planned to open a second restaurant. Dad answered that I preferred to remain in the kitchen for now. I showed both messages to Luis. He offered to call Hargrove. I said no. There were customers in front of us, and I did not want service disrupted by a phone argument with my parents. At 9:50, Dad texted that the group had dropped to 30 people. I replied that Juniper still had no booking for them. At 10:12, the first 2 cars stopped outside. 3 more pulled in behind them. Camille entered with Ethan. Mom and Dad followed with Ethan's parents. The rest of the group came in over the next few minutes. Luis closed the inner doors leading to the dining room so the noise stayed near the entrance. Mom told the hostess that the Mercer party had arrived. The hostess checked the reservation screen twice, then looked toward Luis because there was no listing under Mercer or Camille's new last name. Luis asked everyone to remain near the entrance while he found me. A few guests tried to move toward the bar, but he explained that the bar seats were already occupied. I came out of the kitchen wearing my chef coat. Camille looked past me toward the dining room and asked where the private room was. I congratulated her and Ethan, then said there was no after-party booked at Juniper and we could not seat the group. Camille said I had known they were coming. I told her I had also told them not to come. Dad asked whether we could serve wine and dessert at the bar while he found another solution. The bar was full, and the desserts left in the kitchen had already been ordered by customers. Mom said I was embarrassing the family in front of Ethan's guests. I told her the front entrance was not the place to argue and asked Ethan, Diane, Camille, Mom, and Dad to step over to the coat alcove. Luis stayed with the rest of the group and told them there was a problem with the reservation. In the alcove, I explained what Juniper's record showed. Mom had sent an inquiry through an old account, but the file contained no deposit, signed agreement, or approval from me. The private room now belonged to another customer. Camille said we had never required contracts for family dinners before. Those dinners had been regular reservations for 6 or 8 people. Nobody had ever asked for a private room, a late kitchen crew, and free food for 36. Diane looked at Camille and asked why she had said Mom and Dad owned the restaurant. Camille denied using those exact words. She said she had called Juniper a family restaurant and that Diane must have misunderstood. I told Diane that Luis and I were the owners. My parents and Camille had no financial interest in Juniper and could not approve events. Camille said this was the reason she had not invited me to Hargrove. She believed any question about Juniper would turn the dinner into a conversation about my work. Ethan asked her whether I had ever told her the after party was booked. Camille said Mom had taken care of it. He asked again, more quietly. Did Rowan ever say yes? Camille looked at Mom instead of answering. I showed Ethan the email I had sent before the event. It said there was no booking and that Juniper could not take the group. Dad said plans were already in motion when I sent it. Mom said she had assumed I would help once everyone arrived. I opened the voicemail on my phone and handed it to Ethan. He listened with the phone against his ear. When it ended, he passed it to Diane. She listened too. Camille asked what Mom had said. Ethan told her Mom knew I had not agreed and believed the guests would make me give in. Mom said he was twisting her words. Mom asked to hear the voicemail herself. After I played it, she said the message only showed her trying to keep everyone calm. Dad wanted us to continue the conversation later. I reminded him that I had tried to settle it before Saturday and had sent the answer in writing. Mom said a good daughter would not leave her family standing in a restaurant lobby. I told her she had brought them there after being told there was no room. Diane asked to see the quote. I handed her my phone with the amount on the screen. She read it, then told Camille that she and her husband had already paid for the dinner at Hargrove. They would not cover a second event that had never been booked. Ethan said he would call a hotel and explain the change to the guests. Camille asked whether his parents could help with the cost. He said no. I gave him the names of 2 nearby hotel lounges that sometimes accepted large groups late at night. Mom asked me to put out a few bottles while they made calls. I refused. Ethan returned to the entrance and told the guests there had been a mistake with the second location. He did not blame the restaurant. A few people began calling hotels. Others went outside to wait near the cars. Nobody shouted. Most of them looked uncomfortable and tried not to stare at us. Within 15 minutes, the lobby was clear again. Luis reopened the dining room doors. The architecture firm was still on its dessert course. I went back to the kitchen. One of the hotels agreed to take the group, but it required a minimum spend because 30 people were arriving after 10:30 on a Saturday night. Camille paid the deposit with her card. Dad covered the remaining balance. The final bill was a little under $5,000. Ethan and 2 cousins directed the guests to the hotel while Camille stayed on the phone with the event manager. At Juniper, we finished service a little after 11:30. The architecture firm thanked Luis on the way out and asked about booking another dinner in the spring. The next morning, Luis forwarded me an email from the hotel. Camille had asked for a discounted partner rate and said Juniper House was connected to the engagement event. The hotel wanted confirmation before changing the bill. My reply said Juniper had no connection to the hotel event and had not authorized Camille to speak for the restaurant. I copied Camille, Ethan, Mom, and Dad because the hotel had listed all 4 of them. Camille called within a few minutes. She said the party was over and accused me of trying to embarrass her again. I told her the hotel had contacted Juniper because she had used the restaurant's name, and I would not approve a discount for an event we had nothing to do with. She said I could have answered without copying everyone. I reminded her that all of them were listed in the hotel's email. Then I told her she needed to correct the message she had given the engagement guests. Juniper had never canceled their event. There had been no event to cancel. Camille refused. She said nobody cared about the details anymore. I told her Juniper would send a short correction to Ethan and his parents if she did not handle it herself. My staff were not going to take the blame for losing a reservation that never existed. At 11:46, Camille posted in the engagement group. She wrote that no reservation had been confirmed at Juniper House and that the venue change was not caused by the restaurant or its employees. She also acknowledged that she had repeated information that had not been approved by me, the owner. The message did not include an apology. Several guests replied with short thank yous. One coworker said she had understood that the after party was already paid for. Another asked Camille to send the hotel receipt because she had already contributed cash toward a gift for the evening. Diane did not reply. Ethan called me later and asked for a copy of the original quote. I sent it without discussing Camille or their engagement. Later that day, I emailed a booking policy to Mom, Dad, and Camille. Family reservations had to go through the same system as everyone else. Private events required a deposit and a signed agreement. They could not promise discounts, rooms, staff, food, or payment from Juniper. The old accounts had already been removed, and none of them had the new rear door code. Dad replied that the policy was excessive. I left the email unanswered. 3 weeks later, Mom called Luis about her birthday dinner. She asked him to use the family account. Luis told her the account no longer existed and gave her the website address. Mom asked whether he could make an exception for 6 people. He told her 2 reservation times were still available online. She booked one of them and entered her credit card. The note on the reservation asked whether I would be there. Luis replied that he could not promise my schedule, and Mom kept the booking anyway. On the night of the dinner, Mom and Dad arrived on time. Dad paid the bill. Before leaving, Mom thanked Luis and referred to Juniper as Rowan's restaurant. Luis told me after close. I said, "Good." A few weeks later, I booked a table at Juniper for a Tuesday night when I was not working. A friend met me near the front window and I arrived wearing a sweater. Luis gave us menus and asked whether I wanted to know which cook was covering the pass. I told him I was off and did not need the update. We ordered dinner. Halfway through the main course, I heard the service bell from the kitchen. I looked toward the dining room doors out of habit. A server walked through them with 2 plates. Nobody came over to ask me anything. I finished my meal, paid the check, and drove home. Nobody called me back to the restaurant that night. The next morning, Luis texted that service had stayed quiet after I left. I answered from home, made coffee, and went back to bed.